Hello, Dr. Zeledon. I am delighted to welcome you to the show today.
I'm so excited to be here. I can't wait.
Yes, well, you have a fascinating background, and I know that you will inspire those listening today. So I'd really like to delve into your journey. Can you share a bit about you and how it has inspired the work that you do today?
Yeah, of course. Ooh, let me see. Where do I start? It's like yeah. I was born in Nicaragua and immigrated to the United States when I was really young. And when we immigrated, we had to leave everything behind because it was the Civil War, and also like I had gotten sick younger, so my parents had like spent all their money. Actually, like side story is that I had like 3 weeks to live, and then my dad played the lotto, won the money, and then they used all the money to save my life in Miami. So I had been 6 months hospitalized. Now, of course, they didn't know that when they would come back, that the country would go straight into a crazy war, and that basically like their whole house got devalued from like thousands and thousands of dollars to like pennies. So at the end, they just left everything, right, with as many, many immigrant stories, right, just with the shirts on their back. So I grew up in a working class neighborhood most of my life, because we first moved to California and then moved to Miami. And I like my parents always said education is the way out, right? Education is going to be your vehicle. And then he'd always be like, I came to this country and you have to take advantage of it. So I grew up with that, like, well, one, they had saved my life and I felt that I owed it to them. And second, I also was like, okay, education is my out. And it's funny because I felt a lot of my dreams felt really, really unobtainable at that time,
Mm.
right? Like everything in my surrounding was just like everyone hustling, everyone working paycheck to paycheck, exhausted, and not really a lot of movement. But I was like, it's got to be different. I was like, it has to be different. There's got to be a way. And so I did okay, education's the answer. And so I was like the best student, graduated top of my class in high school. I went to Swarthmore College. And then my journey is like I almost failed because it was really hard, right? I wasn't the kid that went to like chemistry camp or boarding schools or any of those things, right? So, my first semester was really hard. And then that was the first time I had my exposure with a coach. It's
Mm.
kind of she was my tutor, but she was my coach because I asked for help because I was like, I cannot go back home. Like, this is my ticket out. And she actually, I thought she was going to tutor me on subjects, and
Mhm.
she didn't. Actually, all the work was on goal setting, on strategy, on like dividing my work, how to say no, how to prioritize. And I was like, huh, interesting, And then we started working together for the rest of the whole second semester. And then from there, boom, I soared. And then from there, I went off to get my PhD in Berkeley, and then I went to the workforce. In between that, right, some couple ups and downs. But in the workforce, I also was like, wow, I got to chase the ladder. I got to climb the ladder. Because when I first joined, I was like, wait, I have this PhD, I had the check marks, and I'm like, why am I still not making it? I was like, I need to climb the ladder. So I climb the ladder, right? And it's a brutal process. And once I was there, and there when I was finally like, then I was making money, right? They had given me private school for my kids, the big house. Um, I was sitting there in my office space, and at that time it was like this 5 bedroom, and I had one house for my office. And I'm sitting there looking at my 30 plus awards, and I was like, I've made impact here, but this isn't my legacy,
Mm.
and I just felt it. I was like, this isn't where I belong. There's more out there, and there's something different out there, and this isn't it. And that is when I decided, the first time like came to my mind, that I needed to leave. And that was really difficult because no one leaves that job. Like that job is really hard to get. And not only was it really hard to get, but I was like the very few women in these type of leadership positions. And there's only 1.8% Latino in that
Mm.
organization. So to leave that is crazy. Like I remember when I told my parents, they were like, I don't think so. I think you need to really think about this. There's no ideal job. Like, it's just a paycheck. no, Ken, you cannot leave this. Think about your children. And I was like, I just know this isn't it. And all my colleagues were like, you just don't leave it. Like it's kind of like it's almost like
Yeah.
cult, like you don't leave it. And but I just knew inside. I was like, this it isn't it. Cause like I had already been doing this model and I started to see like the whole world needed it. Like it wasn't just here. This was like a big global thing. And so then I decided to take the risk. And honestly, what sparked the risk though was that I had this best friend and me and her used to talk about everything, like about like our dreams, like that one champion you have in your
Yes.
life, that
Yes.
one.
Mm-hmm.
And we would sit there in the kitchen, you know, where all conversations happen, right in the kitchen, sitting there, and I would share with her everything, and she would share with me everything too. And it's funny because at that time, a lot of people like wouldn't assume she was my best friend because she was actually my hairdresser.
Okay.
But yeah, and for the whole community, it's kind of funny, right? But she would use my house as the base and we would talk between her clients and I just felt like I could share with her everything and she would share with me her dreams. And at one point we even made design swimsuits together and
Oh
actually
my.
later I know, and actually later we saw our design, the design that we both made. Imagine this year I saw Nadia Ferreira, the one married
Yeah.
to Mark Anthony, wearing the design. And it's not my clearly someone else came up with it as well and sold it. But I was like, imagine we had gone through with it, we'd be multimillionaires. Um,
Oh my goodness.
I know, but we would share these things. But she came over one day and was like, I'm having all these headaches. I don't know what's going on. I was like, okay, well, what do you need? And she's like, well, I went to the doctor and they said I need to have this surgery. And I was like, okay, well, don't worry. I'll help you fundraise, right? So I got with these other women that were, also, kind of friends with her in the community, and we fundraised for her surgery. All right, so she got the money for it. So it was a Thursday, and she went to her surgery, and then she said, "I'll see you Monday." Well, on Saturday, her daughter's over my house, where we're all close, and we get this text, and she doesn't make it.
Oh my God.
And for me, that was where I hit rock bottom because what was I going to do now, right? She was the one I shared everything with. Like I have other friends, but with her, it's who I really shared everything with, no fear. And I was like, what am I going to do now? I can't do this without her. I don't know what I'm going to do. Um, and then when I went to her funeral, that is when I got so angry because the funeral, it was like a typical Latino funeral where it was all about, okay, everyone, death is coming and we all have to reflect on our lives and things like that. But it wasn't a celebration of her life. And I felt like screaming because I knew who she was, right? And her dreams and her aspirations, and no one was saying them. And then that's when I was like, okay, what is the legacy that, back to that question, right? Of sitting in my room, right? About my legacy and how I want to change that. And a month later, I left. I quit. And I decided I opened the business that I have now. And that's where I birth. And it's more than just a business. I like to say it's like a movement for me, right? When people ask me, what do you do? I'm like, I'm in the business of impacting lives
Mm-hmm.
because it's not about the money for me. It's about the impact and the legacy that I want to leave and the alignment. And so I built it on that, with that burning fire of my why and what I wanted to build. And I don't have an MBA, right? I have a PhD, but not an MBA. And I didn't know anything about business or Instagram or videos or anything. But I was like, I'm going to take it one step at a time and learn it, right? And just learn,
Yeah.
progress over perfection. And then so that's how everything came together. But having that clear, like, why I'm doing it is what's led me to now, right? I didn't know how it was going to go, but I'm like, but by following, right? Like truly like my purpose, my meaning behind it, I had the belief, right, that this will
Yeah.
grow into something and leave the impact and I want. And that's where I am. I wake up every day and I'm like, I can't believe this is my life. And I'm so glad I got that courage to do that, right? And then can honor my best friend in a way that how I wanted to.
Absolutely. And this is why I said this is going to be a truly inspiring chat today. I know you and I connected, and I was able to hear a little bit of the story. And so some of the things that really stood out was just even your upbringing, right? So that situation with your parents, I can't even begin to imagine what they were going through, right? That they weren't sure that, that you were going to live, and then they win the lottery. Like, that's a book in itself. That's a movie. But I think what was so important when when you shared the story is even that you felt the need to have to overachieve and make them proud. And it's like almost that guilt, like, I have to do all the things to make up for the sacrifices. And I think there's a lot of people that operate in that way, and they kind of go through their career, like you said, going that upward mobility, that like reaching the best, the top. But you had your challenges in between and figuring that out, but then having that mentor, where I think that was kind of like your first exposure to coaching, right? But then it sounds like with, the situation with your friend, and I'm so sorry to hear that. I have my allies and people that, your sounding boards, and it sounds like you had this connection with this person that, that really made a legacy in your life, and that she inspired you to really pay attention. And you said that self-awareness moment, like, okay, what am I doing? And now I need to really follow what I want to do. And that's not easy. Like you said, that takes a lot of courage. And so, kind of going back to that, the high achieving, and just what your profession has evolved into. Can you define, what does it mean to be a high achiever in the context of the work that you do in terms of working with leaders and organizations?
Yeah, definitely. And I should note, like, not so sometimes people are like, well, let's say we sometimes think like high achiever is just someone who has met a goal, I guess,
Mhm.
right? But a high achiever is so much more than that. It's like the characteristics of someone, right? So in it's not every organization and not every leader is a high achiever, right? So sometimes there's this like correlation, like every leader must have been a high achiever, not necessarily, right? So high achiever is a person who's like the go-getter, right? So you have a goal, that person's gonna slay it, who's gonna make that goal, right? And you give them the template, they got it, they're gonna go after it, right? And that's something that who I always was, right? So even though I had I feel like that's what helped me in my path, I could say, right? Because I knew that I owed it. I felt all that burden, right? And I was like, I have to do this. I have to be the best and I have to be the top, right? So I had that very clear in mind. Okay, this is the path.
Yeah.
And these are the people I'm going to follow and do. And and but then it also translates the negative side of it of like of not being willing to take big risks, right? Because then you're like, okay, this is the sure path to success. And a lot of high achievers take that because that that's like the safe space, right? But at the same time, you're scared to take any risk that's going to stray you from that, right? Because you've built all of this, right? You've built so much. So it's the fear of losing what you built. So the high achiever takes very calculated risks. It's not that they don't take any, it's that it's like, I'm going to calculate it and take it when I'm sure that it's going to lead to success. But the downside of that is there's actually a lot more room for risks to be taken, right? So the high achiever
Hmm.
has this urge inside to become a trailblazer, but what holds them back from the trailblazing is that fear and also like the imposter syndrome that comes with it, right? Because every time they're moving up, it's like, how did I get here? Do I belong here? And a lot of times they're the first to get there. And so it's like, this feeling, right? I don't know because it's uncomfortable. And then so it's like you doubt it. You doubt taking like a bigger risk, even though you want to. And then there's also like the people pleasing, the perfectionism, because being high achieving, right? You're rewarded for all your achievements. But then because of that reward, that's the positive affirmations you receive. You're scared of doing anything that's not going to be perfect because now you have people looking up to you. You have people relying on you, whether financially or emotionally or anything. So then that kind of leads to this paralysis, right? And those are a lot of the people I work with. It's like on paper or on screen, they're like amazing, right? You're like, oh my
Uh-huh.
God, I love them. I look up to them. They're perfect. But inside, they're struggling because they have to suffer in silence because they can't show their vulnerability. They feel that they can't because they're going to be hyper scrutinized. And the thing is, like, along the way, they have been, whether they were a child and they brought home a 98 score instead of 100, their families being like, I know you could have gone 100. Why didn't you get 100? And then that translates to like later in school or later in like workforce, right? I mean, I even have my own. I remember one time, like, I missed double spacing in a memo, and I was like, are you really pointing that out to me? When there's people who like send you crap products, but it's because it's this perfectionism that is expected.
Mm.
So, but then that hyper scrutiny, we then translate as high achievers as I can never make a mistake and I can't show my vulnerability because when I do, I'm going to immediately be criticized for it. And that criticism and feedback that comes with that is so destructive, right? Because you're like, wow, I poured my heart, soul into that. And they're focusing on minutia, right? Or this one little mistake I made. So that is like the downside of it. So then that, that becomes to like, I want to become a trailblazer, but oh, if I go out publicly and share what I feel or say, oh my God, I could get fired. Oh my God, my parents might, come and criticize me. Oh my God, I might let people down, right? And it's all this like overthinking that comes into our head, which is another side effect, right? So that is like the high achiever. It's complex, right? Because they're like the person, the go-getter, the goal setting, the person you look up to this, but there is a lot of suffering that comes with that. And as a coach for high achievers, it was really difficult for me at first, even though they are me, because
Yeah.
I was like, the usual business formula is, oh, with my clients, I'll be able to do lives with them and get video testimonials. And then I forgot for a second, oh, wait, they don't want the world to know they're being coached. They don't want the world to know that they're seeking help. They don't even want their name on a testimony. And I was like, oh my God, how am I ever going to grow as a business? And that was really difficult, but I had forgotten. That's so right. When I started off, one of the hardest things was being on video and public facing. Even though I have public facing career, I was sheltered by that institution and speaking for that institution. But
Yeah.
that's very different than speaking on my own truths and my own things and leaving, the world to scrutinize it. And then I was like, oh, right, right. They're not the people to comment or say things. Um, so that's how the high achiever works, right? But it's, yeah, I love working with them because it's myself. And I love being able to create a community for folks that are
Mhm.
yearning for it and a space for folks where they can get that help and create that alignment. And sometimes it's just these little tweaks and then create the happiness that, they crave.
Yeah. Thank you for shedding light on that. And I'll tell you that I don't consider myself a high achiever. So for me, learning, when you and I connected and I've worked with people that are high achievers as colleagues or clients. And so I think, from my perspective, I'm sure other individuals too that maybe don't relate to that high achieving those characteristics that you're like, oh man, like for me, I'm like, I wish that I had that, that drive, that ambition and wanting, like the 98% for me, I'm like, you should be so happy you got 98 for like, I'll be happy with an 80%, and it's like such different worlds and understanding that, the aiming for perfection or even the expectations from other people, you start that starts kind of permeating with you and the decisions that you make. And like you said, the paralysis. And so that's fascinating. And thank you for sharing that. So how, I guess, like what moment was it for you where you're like, okay, I need to do something about this, like for even for your own growth?
For sure, because that's the thing, like, even if you're not a high achiever, I think so many people can relate to that expectations, right?
Sure.
So whether you're a high achiever or not, right, you have expectations that are given to you. And the high achiever is just about the way they go about it, right? And their own triggers and and things that they face, but still that whole push for the check marks is real. And especially like in our communities. And it's like this check mark of getting married by X time, buying a house by X time, having X job by X time, right? And we can all relate to that because it's similar, right? It's these check marks that are put on us that if we don't get them by that fixed timeline, we haven't made it.
Yeah.
And then there's the folks that do get those check marks and made it. But when you look at it carefully, right? When they say made it, it's not like they say you're going to made it and be all of a sudden blissfully happy, right? You're going to be satisfied. And I think that's the pivotal moment for me was I had made it, right? Made it. Great. But I didn't want to be satisfied. I wanted to be fulfilled. Like, why should I settle for satisfaction? But to do that, I had to let go of, and this is what a lot of people can relate, whether you're a high achiever or not, is I had to let go of feeling that, for example, oh, I'm not being grateful. Oh, I'm being selfish. Oh, but I owe it to my family and everyone else, right? And all that stuff, so many of us carry. And when you are back then I knew that in my salary, my life, right, I was the top 1%, even in education, right? Technically, right, everyone could be like, oh, you're being so selfish, you have everything, and I would get the phrases like, you're never going to be happy then, nothing's going to make you happy. But that's not true.
Right.
Not true at all, right? I just wasn't in alignment. But those phrases, so many of us can relate to on that, right? That we're sold a certain path, and that's the only path. And that's the path that's going to lead to success and happiness. And if you don't follow it, then either you're not welcomed in the community or the family, or you don't belong, right? And we all want community. And so I think like that was it for me. Like that's when I realized, no, I don't want that. And the thing is, I had been working like around the world with communities, right, as a diplomat for years. And actually I had proved in that world that if we actually listened to people and what they wanted, really wanted, and funded that, like really funded that, they could grow and soar beyond belief, right? And not only develop as a community, right, in economic standards and social standards, right, but also internally. And so at that moment, I had been coaching students, individuals, my staff, right, for years, and then in communities. So I already knew it worked. I just didn't believe that I deserved it. And so I had to first be like, I deserve it, not feel guilty about going after it, and believe that I could do it for myself. And that's for me was at that moment when, I was already kind of on that path, right, with my best friend. But the minute that when she passed away, I was like, life's too short and I got to do this. And
That
I
was
got
your
to,
moment.
yeah, that was my moment.
I really love that word, alignment. And I think that's where a lot of people, like, I know it's like, I need to recalibrate, I need to recenter. I like to use those words, let's recenter, let's take a pause, let's step back, because we're just going through the motions. And I really appreciate you talking about like how this can relate to anyone with expectations. And I'll say, like, as a Latina, right? Like, I don't have children, and I'm in my 40s, and for a long time, like, people have been asking, like, when are you have kids? When are you have kids? Like, you said that check mark. Or just like certain decisions in my life that were frowned upon. But it's like, but that makes me happy, or this is like my route. And so I think as first gen, like, we are trailblazing, we're not following. And so I think for a lot of people, they do get stuck in that noise, and you almost start creating a life that you don't recognize. It's not you. And this is why I really wanted to have this conversation with you, because there might be people listening that are feeling, stuck, or like, you know what, I'm ready for a change. Like, I know this is not my purpose. This is not the legacy I want to leave. And this might be that moment for individuals, right? And so you see, are such a great resource, and such a great example, and such an inspiration. You recently published a book, Creating Your Limitless Life. How does this book guide readers in achieving clarity and overcoming the barriers that you speak about?
Yeah. So the book, yeah, I released it in September, at the beginning of Hispanic Heritage Month. And the book for me was a big part of my legacy because for me, when I was a kid, I had no money. But I had huge dreams, and then you realize I was looking up the stat the other day, only 8% of people make their dreams come true. And you're like, 8%, they give up. So 92% of people give up. And when I was a kid, I didn't want to give up, and so back in the day, pre-internet, right? I would go to where I was allowed to go to, where I grew up in a Latina household as well. I couldn't go anywhere, but I could go to the library.
Yes.
And at the library, I would hang out, right? And I would read books I would read those Lonely Planet travel books
Uh-huh.
and autobiographies, right? Because I really wanted to travel the world. But again, it seems so far-fetched, right? And I really wanted to be this trailblazer. I would read all these autobiographies and try to study like how they did it, right? And at the end, that's why I got the PhDs. I was like, a lot of these people have doctor in front of their names. That must do something for me, And silly, but I was like trying to study people's formulas. And but it was nice in the sense that there was books, and books, people told their stories, and a lot of them shared their how to, right? It was a way, like, I had no access to these people, but I could get inspiration from them and learn from them. So for me, the final thing that was missing for me was a book. I was like, I have this formula that helps you discover your purpose, gives you that clarity, gives you that step by step guide, right? And how to build that resilience so you don't give up. Because that's the key part too. Like, even if you discover your purpose and alignment, you can't give up on it. Right. So, a big part of my book is also like, how do you build resilience? How do you
Mm.
keep this going when things get tough? Because life's going to happen and things are going to get tough. So, how are you going to keep it going? Right. So, I had this whole formula that I wanted to share with the world. So, funny story is that when I went to my publisher and I pitched my book, I was like, I have this formula. I've tested it all around the world. I've tested it with thousands of people. I have all their case studies. They'll even like talk to you and interview, whole thing. And this is what I want the book to be. And they were like, okay. But they're like, you don't want to share your story? I'm like, oh, no, no, no. My story's not that interesting. I just want to share all this stuff about everyone else. I know. Right? Again, the high achiever mindset. And, and they were like, what? And I was like, yes, yes, yes. So at first they started entertaining me. Okay, we're gonna do this whole formula thing. But then they start recording, they start telling me to tell them they're my story, because they're like, "Oh, I want perspective."
Yeah.
Okay, so I start sharing their whole story, and they're like, "How could you say your story is not interesting?" But in my mind, again, it was like that cultural thing on me that, growing up, it was about everyone else who has it worse than us. You know what I mean? So every
Mhm.
time, like, even like I couldn't like I wouldn't even eat lunch at school because like I had the government lunch, no outside, but still they were always like, but there's starving people in Nicaragua, there's this going on in this country, and look at this famine here, right? So I was always like with that perspective, and then working international development, right? I saw a lot of things in that career, right? So I was like, well, I wasn't trafficked, I wasn't a slave child, I didn't like get shot at, you know I have like other things. Well, I don't know if that's necessarily true because I was mugged, but okay, I wasn't like, have these horrible things, right? Where, and they were like, well, that's all perspective. They're like, you're the whole lottery. And then like, I suffered through depression, right? Because again, like I had this whole thing like pressure on me that
Mhm.
I felt like I had to provide, and I had to do this and all this pressure, like I suffered, like, and at 16 I tried to take my own life and I survived it. And they were
That's
like,
goodness.
you survived that. They're like, your daughter in the hospital, when I gave birth to my daughter, right? The hospital treated me like a teenage pregnancy, and she went through this whole birth trauma. And I wasn't a teenager. I was in my 30s and I had a PhD already. But they still had me give birth in the triage, and I didn't know how to like super advocate for myself because I was in shock. I'm like,
Yeah.
why would they treat me like this? But I didn't use my voice then, right? And like, I have all these and then the workforce too, right? Climbing the ladder, I was like bullied and all sorts of things, right? And but I didn't share those things because again, I felt like I have to be there for others, right? And when they told me that, I was like, okay, they're like, the people need to hear your story because they need to see everything you've overcome. And it's going to give them context on how you use your formula in your own life. And so I do it, right? But then there's a section in the book where about the workforce where, I share some very like very real things that happen to women in leadership, But I chickened out at one point and I deleted I took out the 5 pages and I put them out. I'm like, I'm not putting them in. But then this friend of mine calls me and he's like, Esther, I want you to ride with me to this thing that we do like this night of like growth mindset nights in the city. He's like, I want you to ride with me. He never calls me to ride with him. But I was like, I'm very open to synchronicity. I don't believe in coincidences. And I believe that people have messages to send you, right?
Yes.
And I
Mhm.
was like, this is a message for me somehow. And I always just go, yes, okay. I just go with it, and that's why I talk to people on buses, trains, everywhere. I feel like everyone has a message to send.
Yeah.
So he picks me up. And in the car, he's venting to me about everything that his wife is experiencing in the workforce.
I know where this is going. I love
This
it.
is literally everything that I had written in those 5 pages. And I sat there, right? And here I was listening to him and being a source of support. But I go to him at the end of it. I'm like, and he was like, I feel so much better that you understand recovery. And I was like, this message, I told him, was more for me than it was for you. I'm like, I'm actually like, you helped me more than I helped you in this moment. And he was very confused. But I'm like, you'll understand later. And then at that event, it's like all these other things echoing. And I went home and I looked at my husband and I go to him and he sees me and I'm like busy typing and putting everything back. And he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, everything's going back in. And he's like, what changed? And I'm like, I realized that by not sharing it, I'm not being authentic. And by not sharing it, I'm leaving out something that could help someone and realize that they're not alone. And then I realized at that moment, that's the whole point of sharing your story. And so people realize they're not alone in the struggle and that you see them and you hear them and that you can get through it, right? And like that was the principle. So it didn't matter that I hadn't been trafficked or a slave child, right? It was more that someone just like me in different parts of my story is going to see themselves through my story and realize that they can have alignment, right? They can have happiness, they can have everything that they manifest and more. And so that's how the book came about, so I put everything, all my full stories in part one. It's longer than what I thought because I decided not to take anything out. It's all there. And then part two is like the whole formula and then like the whole application of it. So in this one, my publisher's like, usually like we keep it at this word count, but they're like, I think it all needs to go there. And so we left it like that. Yeah. And
That's incredible.
that's the
I
book.
love I love that. And I appreciate your vulnerability and your transparency. I imagine, that it's not easy to I know you've been doing this for a while, right? Sharing your story. Where people are hearing it for the first time, those that are listening today. And even me, I'm learning so much about you and your journey, and I'm feeling inspired. It's like I know I'm listening here, I'm interviewing you, but I'm like, I would love people to just see my facial expressions. Like, I'm in awe. I have had to hold back tears. I have a lot of empathy, and just hearing your story, I'm like, oh my goodness, like I want to have this like long conversation with you, right? Like I want to pause and be like, wait a minute. Because you're sharing all these things that for me, I mean, they're so heartfelt and disheartening. Your experiences and things that have shaped the person that you are today. And I'm so glad that you were able to put all of that out there in your book, because you're right. I think something that I feel like listeners to be aware of, and I won't take this advice as well, is that we have these gifts and these stories that we hold on because we don't think that anyone cares, or that people are not going to relate, or like you said, like, oh, it's not really a big deal. But I think it is our responsibility to know what those gifts are and to share that. That is what our purpose is. um so, thinking about your book, because I definitely want to check out your book, and those listening today that want to continue hearing more of your story, would you be willing to walk us through a brief self-reflection exercise that that you believe can help people identify their next branch point?
Yeah, of course. So I also want to add that the book, I also created a workbook that goes along with it. Because, the book has it all, like the story, the whole formula and the application. But the workbook gives you, it's a nice separate piece. And the way I envisioned it is like the workbook is nice to go back to several
Mhm.
points of your life. Like for me, like the best books are the ones that you can go back to and then see where you are and see where you were and see how things changed. And, I still go back to my journals of when I was 5 and be like, did the things come true? You know what I mean? Did I manifest this? And it's nice to review that and you realize you are always who you were, right? And so in the workbook, I have a lot of really good exercises that are really impactful, that go even deeper than the book that I just want to encourage everyone to check out as well. So one of the exercises that I like to do, I think gives people like the is
Mhm.
I'm going to give you a scenario. We can actually do it live. That you've been invited to G7. So if people don't know what G7 is, it's like the global 7, the big heads. It used to be 9, now they're 7. That they all get together, right, in the world, and they're discussing like the global problems they want to tackle together. So you've been invited to the G7, and they've asked you on the spot there, what global problem would you solve if you were given $2 billion from us today?
That's amazing. You want me to answer that?
Yeah, let's do it on the spot.
Oh my, so $2 billion.
Yeah, and if it's too
And
little for you, make it 5.
oh, I love how you think. Think big.
Mm-hmm.
Uh Something global. Global. Well, see,
First
that's
thing that comes to mind.
and I'm gonna say the first thing that comes to mind for me, because of the nature of the work that I do, and because I know my purpose. Kind of hearing your story, and this is why I have this platform. I love sharing people's stories of how they discovered what where they find fulfillment and that educational piece, right? And so for me, my mission is helping people, provide them the tools to own who they are, own their strengths, and just really creating that path that they want. So if I had all that money, I would love to create, educational systems, programs for youth. Like it starts when you're young. Like in your situation, the way that you're so impressionable, and our self-confidence, all those things start, where our personalities, everything starts building at such a young age, or such a vulnerable time in our development. And so I would want to do self-confidence programming and career development, starting with the little ones, with adolescents. I feel like those experiences shaped my life and the way that I view the world today, and giving people the tools to pave their unique paths, but to recognize what they bring into this world. That is what comes into my mind initially, because that's
Perfect.
my purpose.
No, that's perfect. So, like it's so that question is right. You would answer any global problem that you see, right? It could be water, it could be climate change, it could be mental health, right? Anything. And you answered the second part, which is like, how would you do that? Right. And like you gave such a great answer, right? Like that's why you have this platform. You'd work with adolescents, right? So it sounds like a lot of like the bottom up
Yeah.
and tackling like key parts of like people's lives that are like really pivotal, right? So the how you answer that question, my next twist in that, when you thought about your how in your process, do you do that with your own personal problems as well? Follow that same process?
The brainstorming, the way that I went about answering it, do I do it to solve my own problems?
Yeah, or like for a friend.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yes. So
Yes.
yeah. Yeah. So that's why I love this exercise. Because when you ask someone straight up,
Mm-hmm.
What is your unique value add?" You know how in interviews,
Yeah.
"What do you bring to the table? What's your unique value add?" Right? What do you do? No, everyone freezes and they
Uh-huh.
don't know how to answer, right? They're like, "Oh, I'm organized. I bring energy," right? but the thing is, right? What I like about this question about scenarios, and I have many of them in my book, is that it kind of puts you a little bit outside, right? Thinking about something external.
Mm-hmm.
But how you answer it is how you show up in the world. It's how you solve problems, whether it's professional, whether it's personal, whether it's anything. And that is the gift and that unique value add that you have in this world. So imagine when you go into an interview, right? You could say, oh man, you know what? Like I help people at their pivotal stages in their life. I help people share their stories. I provide platforms and spaces for people to speak up, So
You're
you would
gonna
nail
make me cry.
it.
No, that is so fascinating as you're talking. I'm like, yeah, this is why I'm in higher ed, because I work with established professionals, but it's like I'm like, oh, if only they had the tools and the resources and the conversations earlier on, right? And so I work at a college, and for me, I'm like, this is my opportunity. This is why I love teaching. It's like, let me get in front of them now. So when they're having these conversations 10 years from now, they have a toolkit. And so that is fascinating,
Exactly.
girl.
Yeah. So it's fascinating, right? And so then you
Thank you for
realize,
that. Thank you for
yeah, of
that. My
course. And
goodness.
so you're like, I was always that person. And then when you start going back in your life, and that's what I do in my workbook, in my book, you start realizing, oh my God, I've always been this person.
Yeah.
So when you think about your next steps, right? When you think about your alignment and where you think about places you didn't have alignment, you're like, was I able to show up with my full self there? And then you're like, oh, I couldn't. And then when it comes to thinking about anything next or any opportunity, right? This is the first screening. Can I show up the way I bring my gift to show up in that space? Will they value it? Because that's the thing. There's nothing wrong. There's so many things that when you're in misalignment, you think something's wrong with you.
Yep.
Like I don't fit in here. Must be something wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just that they don't need your how-to. They don't need your solution, but there's a billion other places that need your solution, right? So like the first step is, what's the solution I bring? And who is going to value and who urgently needs it now? And those people who urgently need it are going to be screaming for you. And then you're going to realize, oh my God, that's when you're like happy every day because you're bringing that every day, right? And this is just one piece. Then it's like, all the other exercise, then you're putting it all in. You're like, wow, even how you want to show up in your relationships and, in anything, your friendships, like all this applies to everything, how you the impact you give as a friend, you know, and all this stuff is tied, but sometimes we don't know, right? So I even have exercises of like text your friend and ask them, why are you my friend? Because I want you to also validate it, right? And a
Yep.
lot of what they respond is going to be so to this, and you're going to be like, wow, this is my authentic self. And also once you know your authentic self, right, now we can start communicating that, right, through our friends, through our family, through even LinkedIn, our professional world, through our resumes, through our interviews. So if you're going to
Mhm.
interview and you're like, this is the solution I can bring to your institution, you know, yes or no, and you'll know even in the interview if it jives or not, right? And like I remember I was coaching this one girl, and I was super nervous when I was like beginning, because I knew like we were doing her whole exercise, but I mean, and she had spent 3 months unemployed. And so she really needed a job. But I was like, this job, you can't show up as yourself. And this is the thing. Once you start it, it's really hard to get out. I'm like, just give me 3 more months. I know financially it's hard for you, but I can't tell you the value of waiting for something that is aligned with you.
Mm.
And then 3 months later, and I was super nervous about it, right? Because there's nothing worse than having someone's life on the line, right? And then like
Yep.
3 months later, she found a job and she was like, oh my God, I can't thank you enough. I would have settled for that. And I was like, that's the thing. Like, and sometimes we settle because we're in this scarcity and fear that that's the only thing that's going to come to us. But when we do these exercises and we know our value, you realize
Mhm.
there's no competition. There's enough space for all of us.
That's
I
right.
used to tell my leaders in the teams I used to manage, I was like, even though I'm on top, all of you are leaders. All of you have a unique value add in this space. And I want us all to bring it, because when we all bring it to the table, we're going to soar, because we're going to have a shared mission and vision. And we're going to know how each of us are contributing to it and grow, right? And so we created those spaces. So I even know in teams it's possible, but it's when we don't, when we put so much emphasis on titles rather than people's value, right? And that's why I have like in my book title, Chasing the American Dream, crossed out. And it's not that there's anything wrong with wanting a house or marriage or kids or anything like we were saying, right? It's more about like these fixed paths and
Yeah.
timelines, or that there's only one way, or that, you know what I mean? Or that the title is what defines you. No, we all have like you said, a gift, a value add. That's our defining thing. And so what you should
Absolutely.
instead is create your own. That's why my whole thing is create your limitless life. That definition of you. That's with your legacy, your value add, what brings you happiness. And that's going to be different from the person next to you. And that's okay. And we can all create like community and support each other in that. And in that, we're stronger, you know?
You shared so much insight and encouragement and motivation and inspiration. And one of the things that you said that I think will resonate with a lot of listeners, because these are the conversations that I have, is what you said. When people are in organizations where they feel stuck and they're like, okay, I'm not good enough, right? They start questioning their self-worth. And because I've had these conversations with some clients, and it's like, no, it's the environment. Like, you have these gifts. I'm a strengths-based coach. So I'm always talking about gifts and their strengths. But you said, in the way you phrased it, was more the problem that you solve. They don't need the way that you solve problems. So, but there are plenty of organizations, or you starting your own business, that do need the gifts and the way that you approach problem solving. And so finding that and not being afraid, I love that advice. So, it's so great to hear that you are coaching people, and I'm sure you have services and programs. Can you share more about what you offer, and if maybe people want to work with you, how do they find you?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm on Instagram. Like I have like a fun Instagram, b.act.change. I share a bunch of random stuff, but it's a lot of inspiration stuff. So I have like an Instagram platform, and I do one-on-one coaching, right? And I also do coaching with teams, with companies, right? So sometimes it's like their leaders, or even staff members, are like, man, my team needs to come together and really get together on like what's the shared mission vision, and we all need to understand like what's our value add, and we're going to be stronger, right? So I do a lot of work with like teams. I also work with NGOs, because a lot of NGOs are a lot of service-based people that go in to make a difference. But it's really coming together about what as an NGO is going to be our value add, what's our change and impact we want to make in the world, everybody coming together on the shared mission. And then my one-on-one coaching is really based on the person, right? Purpose is individual, the way I see it, and like mission and vision is groups,
Mm-hmm.
whether you're a community, NGO, or a business. I also do speaking because I love to inspire, like I think you were saying, right? Like youth and companies and people in these moments. And so I do a lot of, I do keynotes, and I also do speaking and workshops to really get people like inspired with some of these questions together, coming together, have that reflection time to really be like, see my story, see my path, do these questions in action and move forward. So yeah, so that's a little bit about me and the business and the things that I offer.
Fantastic. And I'll add all of that information in the show notes.
Yeah.
I just have to say, like, I am always so grateful to have the opportunity to connect with people from all over the world. And just connecting with you, Dr. Zeledon, like, has been so impactful. And in the short time and our interactions, and you're just such a wonderful person. And I appreciate you so much. And it was so great connecting with you. And thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule and everything that you're doing, and with the book launch, and to spend a little time with me and with my listeners. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you everyone for listening.